back to another episode of the Non-Standard Podcast. I'm your host, Manny Lamson, and again, I'm super excited for this episode because it is part 2 with Michael Mannozzi, the Air Force Athlete of the Year in 2020, which we cover in part 1. We also cover his journey through race walking all the way to the Olympic trials before he got into the military, and then this one continues off after he got coined by Chief Bass, again going into becoming a WCAP athlete, which is world-class athlete program for the Air Force, where his job is specifically to train for race walking. He eventually moves to San Diego, gets all set up there, goes through ALS, which is Airman Leadership School, crushes it, and then now Staff Sargent. We talk about that journey as well. I hope you guys enjoy it. If you learn anything, please share, save, like, and follow. You can reach out to me on Instagram at Manny Mustache. That's the easiest way if you have any feedback or you have any people you want me to reach out to. I'm looking forward to chatting with some new people and seeing who else is out there. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the first part 2 with my man Mannozzi, who has just finished off on the last episode. If you haven't listened, you can go back and watch that. I'll put that in the intro just like you guys just heard. But again, I'm your host, Manny, and then we will be discussing the continuation of his journey after getting Athlete of the Year in 2020. So moving into year 2021, where he just got coined by Chief Bass, because I think she was Chief Bass at that time, right?
Yeah, she was in her first year, I would say.
Okay.
First full year. I mean, she'd been she actually probably hit about her 1 year mark at that time.
Okay, yep. And then we will kick it off from there as he moves into, life after that. He is now an athlete for the Air Force. Because I think before that, you weren't officially an athlete for the Air Force yet, right? You were just like doing events and then you won the award. Is that correct?
Correct. That's absolutely correct. In fact, funny enough, there were some times I had never won, even though I got coined by Chief Bass. I won an Air Force level award, never won Airman of the Quarter while I was, I appreciate you laughing because it shows that I'm not just completely being biased.
You just skipped all the little ones.
Well, and it's okay. Like, obviously I'm happy for other people that won it. Let's just be clear. Other people are deserving. There's many talented people in the Air Force. It was just a surprise to me because, how you're told you have to make an impact and do big things. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the feedbacks I received about that when I had talked to my supervisor and also when I didn't make below the zone, at the time, when you're an A1C, that's like the next, rank or the next goal to try to make for a lot of people. And what happened was the feedback I received from some leadership and some chiefs more specific was that, with below the zone and was that race walking or the sports aspect were not my primary duty is how those could be looked at. And so that helped me understand. Yeah. That helped me understand that better, of how that fits in with what I'm doing as my primary duty. But that adds to answering your question. That correct. My primary duty was in the Chapel Corps as religious affairs airman. And race walking is something that I struggled and strived and fought and clawed to do outside of my family needs and the requirements of the Air Force. So thanks to my wife being extremely supportive, to her, sacrifices too, so that I could try to be where we're at now.
Yeah, and then we'll dive into that when it comes to some leadership traits as well, because some people, I love it that you're becoming a better leader when technically you haven't really had the opportunity to lead, right? You're still learning your job. You're new in the military, but you've established this need to work harder and do better really outside in the physical world. And then I'll ask you some questions about that later too, when it comes to the mindset of race walking. Obviously you're training for hours. So what do you do during that time? How do you prepare? How do you, because there's a lot of people that ask me questions like, hey, what do you do when you run or ruck for, 3 to 4 hours? And for me, I think a lot. I think a lot about what my day is going to entail. I plan out my week. I go over meetings I have. I try to get rid of a lot of those jitters and stress that will come up through the day when I'm on these long runs. So if you want, let's just dive right into that. Let's, what do you do on your race walks? What's going through your mind?
Wow, what a good question. You really are going deep. You're really going pretty cerebral here with me, which is great. With race walking, it's been an evolution over the years, and it's something that I've been fine-tuning, meaning what that specifically means is I'm realizing I have to focus on my biomechanics and technique, because that, especially when before I was in WCAP and I only had an hour or so before the duty day, because
Oh yeah.
and I'm training, I would realize like this is the only time you get to focus on your dream, to focus on your personal goal. Now the Air Force is part of that dream and everything, and have, loving my family, of course, is just another level. But this is your Mike Mannozzi's personal race walk goals or athletic goals. This is your only time you get to do that. So I would try to focus on my technique. Inevitably, it's always a battle of getting distracted, because you have doubts, you have rerunning things that went through your mind yesterday, maybe what you dreamt about. And I have to, of course, filter. I don't know if you find yourself doing that.
I definitely have to like control what I'm thinking about, right? Like I just can't run and think, because then it's just like, it's weird. So I'm definitely more focused on what I'm thinking about. Then, because running, I think it's not as much on the technique as it is race walking, because like race walking, I feel like is a lot more technique, because you got your hips, you got your feet, right? There's certain ways you have to move. Running is pretty fluid, you get in a groove. And so you can focus more on thinking when you're running. For you, like you said, you're trying to figure out, hey, how deep do I think while still focus on my technique?
That's a great point, because I obviously, maybe not obviously, but I was a collegiate runner, and that's how I got into race walking largely. But with regard to that, I do find that I could almost let my mind go more running than when I race walk as well. So when I'm race walking, first and foremost, I try to focus on my technique, get myself into a good rhythm so that I know that I'm activating my core. I'm driving from my hips. I'm getting powerful arm swing that counterbalances what's going on below my waist, right? Like, so your legs and your opposite arm, opposite leg is what that means. And I'm also trying to be aware of my movement patterns to avoid previous injuries that I've had that have impacted me over the last, I've been going for 16 years and 14 post-collegiate this year, or actually, 13 post-collegiate. And I also have to, what I've started to do really is focus on the positives, because instead of letting like negative things or doubts or my fears or things that have made me uncomfortable or things people have said that maybe come to mind for whatever reason while I'm training, I realize those things will not help me, and they're not productive. They're not going to help me reach my goals. They're not going to help my career. They're not going to help my opportunities. And this has been a evolving process that has even taken off more while I've been in WCAP, because now it's like, okay, you're blessed that you have this opportunity to live your dream. What do you do with it? I don't have a supervisor sitting in the next door over saying, hey, are you focused on your technique, or are you focused on I have to be both my commander and my troop at the same time. And so I find that I kind of break it down in the minutes. A lot of times, like today I was riding a bike, and I just give thanks while I'm on the bike just to keep myself from letting myself drift too much, because it's kind of a suspect. I'll dedicate oftentimes when I'm race walking, I'll go maybe a kilometer. I'll dedicate one, say, to my mother or to my son. And or something positive. Like yesterday, my son did very well through a dental appointment. He had to have some dental work done that wasn't pleasant, but he showed a lot of bravery despite his fear. He cooperated and went through it. And that's something that I will be like, okay, I'll dedicate this kilometer. And if I have to break it down further, maybe this 500 meters, or because we have a marked course that typically has half kilometers marked, or I'll even break it down to a minute. But what I really do is I don't typically think the whole minute, say, about my son's dental appointment and my admiration for his boldness. What I'll do is I'll say, this one goes to Matthew. I'm thankful for him. And it might be only a few second acknowledgement, but then I try to go right back into a self-check of my technique and my form, because I realize what you think about is like, is going to help me. And if I could think about being efficient and refocusing on my form, the more I do that, the more likely I'm going to continue to be efficient when it comes down to race day.
Man, I love that because, man, I feel like most people think differently when it comes to moving. Like, for instance, I feel like some people, when they run, they're fueled by negative thoughts or self-doubt or people that don't believe in them, right? Like, I've caught myself running plenty of times where I've ran based off of what people are assume I'm going through right now, or with me not flying. Like, I sort of run off of not necessarily hate, but like, something like that. So to hear you really flip the script and run off of positive vibes is pretty cool. Cause, yeah, I don't know. Like, cause, I think of lifting, right? Most people will lift out of, I say hate, but not really, we're not happy when we lift, right? So it's like, it's a different mindset. And I definitely see where you're coming from. Where just like, throw that positive in your mind. Cool. Okay. Now recage, focus on this, get through this kilometer. Okay. Now move here, and you take it. I think it's crazy. You take it kilometer by kilometer, cause that's not a long distance. I take usually mine by 3 miles at chunks or 5 miles at a chunk. When I'm thinking about what I'm going to do during like this 3 miles or these 5 miles. And sometimes for me, like a podcast, I'll throw a podcast on because they're roughly 45 minutes to an hour. So usually I'll be able to gauge like how far my run's going based off of how far I'm in the podcast. And then that'll help me recage as well. That's cool, man. I like how you use the positive side of things to keep you focused.
It's really been a challenge for me to kind of put, my faith in action. And really what I mean by that is like when I put things, I'll give you a good example. When I put things on, let's say on social media, and it's, it's negative, right? Maybe even addressing or mentioning something negative or someone who had impacted me negative. I find that a lot of people are less, they almost try to find a gap to criticize you for not being positive or not seeing how lucky you are, or, oh, you don't, I've had it harder because I've had this situation. They almost compete with you to have a victim story. And I find that to be counterproductive, because then that just takes you down a rabbit hole of something else that wasn't there before. I had posted something once about, being a parent with children with autism, and it was meant to be more of a bridge for other people to relate.
Yeah.
And someone who does not have autistic children had wrote me and said, well, or you could start writing about it or something of that sort, but more of a critique, a passive aggressive critique than really anything productive coming from it. And I wasn't even complaining. And so I was reposting a post. So I realized that when you don't give that opening for negativity, or that, fueled by something negative, there's nothing wrong with being motivated by people who doubt you and that have wronged you. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, in my experience, people are very unsympathetic to that, and almost, I would say, use it as a way to point out my flaws. And I find that then that just like distracts you even more, takes you even further from your epicenter of positive results.
Nice. All right. So let's, that was one question I threw out there. So let's continue on. You get coined by the chief. I think at this time you were at tech school, right? Or where were you getting ready to go?
Great question. I was actually getting ready for deployment. I almost didn't even go to that AFSA convention. I went because I was an award recipient, and I didn't understand, it's my first time really using DTS myself. So that was a learning curve. And my back was against the wall. I mean, my son had just been diagnosed, my second child, with autism in May. This was maybe August at latest. I think it was late July. It was actually late July. So I had to advocate for services that he was now eligible for. My wife, she's from the Philippines, my better half here, and she had just, never had really got a chance to to practice driving, though. Like, the opportunity was never what it was once we were together again, and I was at my first base assignment at Wright Pat. So we were really putting in the practicing the time and hours and nuances of her to get her driver's license. And that was another thing I was trying to take care of before I deployed, as well as all the readiness. Mind you, I've been in the Air Force less than 2 years, and I'm, so this was a lot at one time. And I was getting ready to deploy, so that was over my head the whole time, and that sense of urgency and wondering if I'm going to run out of runway before it's time for me to take off.
Let me ask you a quick question. During this time, with you being so new in the military, did you have any mentors, or who did you? I don't know, like, because I feel like most people during this time, they've been in usually the military a little bit longer before they deploy, so they may have like a supervisor or someone close to you. But with you being pretty new, who'd you have around you? Was there anybody there, or was this just a lot of like, do and learn, and you just knew you had to, like you said, buckle down and get there before the end of the runway?
I would say it's a great question. I would say that from my memory, one that stands out, I do remember messaging Tech Sergeant Fernando, who was not at my base. He's a race walker as well, as I mentioned in the first episode.
Yep.
And he just said, hey, make sure you spend as much time as you can with your family. So that helped me learn to set some boundaries on some people who were vying for my time, to tell them like maybe later, or what is it that you want to talk to me about, versus like having them say, hey, I want to call you. Ask them what it's about so you can kind of gauge how much time I need, or if it's even necessary with everything else that was on my plate, right? Instead of just being a person that says yes because you want to be nice to everybody, not and you're used to not that goes kind of deeper, but basically when you're kind of raised to do as you're told, but then you also become this person as an adult who tries to treat people well because you appreciate when people treat you well and give you time, right? So I had to kind of find myself at that, where another level of starting to develop healthy boundaries, not just be mean to people, but know when you are taking on too much. And I was trial by fire. So getting to the military aspect, that this applied equally. There's multiple stories, but here's where things started to take a turn. My supervisor was a first-time staff sergeant, excellent guy, really helpful, especially his strengths were my weaknesses and vice versa. So we really, I think, helped each other, drove each other nuts, but helped each other. And then his supervisor, who was a tech sergeant, came back from deployment around that time. And he just started getting back into the office. And he, at the time, was, I would annoy the heck out of this guy. He's the one I told you that, when I'm in his office at Parade Rest and he's telling me about, you've been in the Air Force 2 weeks. Well, this is where this relationship changes. He comes back from deployment from the dirty deed, and he's now adjusting back to our home station office. And he starts getting involved with something. And what happened was, there was a time that I was supposed to work Eagles, but I had other things, or I talked to my UDM, and she was waiting on a few trainings, and I was struggling to locate where to launch one of the trainings. I'd never been to the site before, and for whatever reason, my government computer wasn't letting me on it, and my supervisor was out of the office or whatever. So you could see how this doesn't take long to become a couple-day issue when it could have been just like a couple hours, right? So this other supervisor, so now I have to work Eagles, and I was like, well, shouldn't I be here instead of at Eagles doing my deployment stuff? Because I'm running out of time, and this needs to be done by the end of this month. At the time, it was like June or something. No, it was July, because I was going. I had the AFSA PEDS TDY already approved, and and that's professional development, so that was already like good to go. But I remember that other supervisor, Tech Sergeant Jevedon, came back, and he's like, "What's the problem with you working Eagles? Everybody works it." I said, "I don't have a problem working Eagles. In fact, I enjoy greeting people at the gate first thing in the morning. The problem is I'm going to lose two and a half hours of being in the morning, getting a head start on this deployment stuff before people start calling. Because you got to remember, I'm an A1C, you're a worker bee. You don't just ignore the phone call. Yeah. If somebody's spouse comes in and they're asking me questions about speaking to a chaplain, about a baptism, about a service, about an event we're offering, I don't just turn her away and go, talk to the hand. Like, I don't do that. You have to stop. You stop what you're doing, or you at least kind of put a pause on what you're doing, however appropriate, and then you address it, because they're standing right there outside my cubicle. And I had a cubicle. I didn't have an office, right? So you're an A1C. I literally, like, I'm the first person they see when they walk in the door. So whether it's a cleaning person, or it's the commander, or it's someone's spouse, I'm the first one that they walk over and go, hey, because they see you, and they go right to you with whatever it is that they're going to bring up to you. And so that sometimes will throw a wrench in you getting stuff done. Now, this is me learning how to manage because not everything that's thrown at you, how do you prioritize it? And this was a skill I'm learning, and I'm learning as I go, right? Trial by fire.
Yeah.
And this supervisor, well, another Tech Sergeant Carter ended up covering for me. He's an outstanding individual as well. He covered my Eagle shift so that I could just, start hammering away at that deployment readiness items that had a deadline, a quick approaching deadline. And the other thing that happened was this supervisor helped set me down. He took me to McDonald's, and I remember we were having McDonald's to eat, and he basically helped share some of his advice on how to prioritize. He also saw some things that he criticized me on what I could do better. There was a time we had to do some task around the office, and he what happened was, if I would have said no, I'd have been the only person to say no while everybody else is doing the work, and that would have not been a good look. And so he told me, like, you need to learn how to stand up and advocate and tell people no when you have deployment readiness things that are urgent that you have to do. You have to learn to tell people no. And I said, well, I would have been the only one in the office to tell them no. Well, everybody else is hands on deck, moving things that we were tasked to do as a chapel unit. And he's like, yeah, if I was here, that wouldn't have happened, because I would have told you to. And so what happened was, I go back to my unit, after we go back to the unit after lunch, I start working on something, and somebody else comes over to me and goes, and it's a staff sergeant. He goes, hey, I need some information on this. And I said, well, that's actually not my task. And then that supervisor came over and goes, hey, what is it? And he goes, I need this information. He goes, yeah, that's not Mannozzi's job. Leave below. And so he kind of started to teach me how to set boundaries, but he also, like I said, he didn't just baby me. He held me accountable and called me out on the things that I should have done better, and really helped me he really helped me learn how to prioritize certain things, because when you have 20 things, not all of them are equally important at the same time.
Yeah.
And it can be difficult for anybody to do that, but it's even more difficult when you tack in some challenges to learning, like ADHD and such. That makes it even more of a difficult task in that case, to put, okay, what's first, what needs to be done second, and then what's done when you have extra time, right?
So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So I'll jump in. I just started doing that on my daily tasks probably about a month ago. And it was brought up to me with someone I had a podcast with. Dan's going to bug me now who I was talking to. He's a senior airman or a staff sergeant about to commission to ROTC. He's a crew chief enlisted right now. But he said when he wakes up, he writes down his tasks. I was like, oh, I do that. But then he goes, but then I prioritize which tasks are important that day, so that I don't get bogged down on just what I wrote, how the order I wrote them down. Because maybe I just wrote them down in a random order and I just start going top to bottom. But that first one either took too long or it wasn't needed, but the last one was really important. So he'll write down his list really without thinking, and then he'll go back through and number like 1 through 5 or whatever, whichever ones he needs to get done quick, or which one's going to take the longest to get done based off that day. And then whichever he doesn't finish, he just moves to the next day. And then he has like a weekly tracker as well. And that really helped me understand my list of things is prioritizing, just like you were talking about, learn how to prioritize what needs to get done now or later, and helps you de-stress a little bit too.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, first of all, it's very impressive. I love what you just shared. What did he do with the ones that you said took too long?
Yeah, so he also realized some of those tasks he put up, may have to do that day, don't have to get done that day. There's probably just something he, like for me, like I usually write down all my tasks the next day, the night prior. So when I go to sleep, I'll just sit there and go, oh, I need to like do my assessments in my group. I need to send this email. I need to schedule a dog appointment. All these random things at night. I'll write them down so I don't think about them. I'll prioritize them at night just by putting numbers on them. And then I'll know, like, if let's say there's 5. Let's say I only do 3, but then those next 2, I know they're not important, so at least I can move to the next day and maybe they're the top ones. But I sort of just keep rolling them over to the next day, knowing I don't have to do them that day. They're just there to get done. Like, let's say mowing my lawn, I'm like, oh, I have to do it Monday. If I don't do it Monday, okay, I'll just move to Tuesday. As long as I keep it on my list and don't forget about it, I know it'll get done soon. And so understanding that when you write something down, you don't have to get it done that day. That's usually and it's hard for people when they do a list because they think they have to get the list done or they're unsuccessful. When in reality, like like just doing a couple things a day is a huge win, which is why that's why I make my bed every morning, man. It's a huge win for the day. That's why I do these little steps. And then if I don't read, I know I can read later or tomorrow or the next day. But yeah.
I love this. This is actually, so I have the honor to be on your podcast, but then here I am learning from this staff sergeant, who's about to be a lieutenant, which is phenomenal. Hats off to him, and well, literally a salute, I guess you would say, but would be appropriate. However, this is some really good nuggets these are things that are like game changers, and growing up and not really learning how to manage ADHD on top of, just being an adult in the world and the challenges it brings regardless. This is so helpful. And it's funny that I joined the military, where when I was a civilian, I thought the military would not be a place that I could thrive, especially with an ADHD diagnosis where I knew medically I could be disqualified. And I could say that on this side of on this side of history right now. However, I have not only found that the military offers a lot of support because it provides a lot of structure in most cases, not all, but I have found, especially early on in basic and then tech school. However, I'm learning how to improve and streamline like laser focus because of things like this that make you just a more productive person, which, let's step outside even just the military uniform. It impacts as being a husband, a father.
Oh yeah, dude, it's helped me dramatically as a husband and father. Because before I wouldn't prioritize like at-home tasks. I would think I should only be doing stuff applicable to work, like checking emails, doing this. But now on my daily list, there are things like take the vet, buy my wife roses, maybe this or flowers just once this week, or a date night, like that is like a once a month thing. So I got to make sure I do that. I think a lot of times we get stuck with a task having to be stuff to move forward in work, when in reality, it's just anything that'll help you just move through the day. Like from when you wake up to when you go to bed, not when you clock into work and when you leave work.
Because they're not compartmentalized. They all are part of the big.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So, and they're all part of like your satisfaction and productivity, right? Because you can't just not do take care of family and not support the mission, but you can't just support the mission and be absent at home.
Yep.
Now, just real
let's
quick.
jump in. So you get ready to deploy at the end of 21. This sounds like, right?
Yep, that's what I was just getting to. Real quick, I learned a lot in that small window right before I deployed from that Tech Sergeant Javedon. He really kept it real with me, but he really guided me because he cared, and that showed a difference in this, I would say, mentorship relationship where I could tell that he really cared, and if he didn't, he wouldn't have spent the time helping me.
Dude, that's huge.
I'll tell you what, it almost scares me what I would have done without him, because I really needed a lot more guidance with a deployment. I needed a lot more guidance on what things, like, I can read it, but it's a foreign language to you until you understand, especially if I can't find where something is, and I can't, like that's, I mean, I'm a first-term airman, at this point, like, I have a few more tricks up my sleeve of how to figure things out that I didn't have at that time. And
it's crazy to think how much harder we will work when we know people care for us. So that's one of my huge pet peeves, and one of my ways I think we can solve a lot of military problems is just care for the people around you, and they will work harder. There are so many problems I've seen just in my scope of my military career and my job where mistakes have happened because those people, they don't care what they're doing because nobody around them cares for them. Just like you said, if that person wouldn't have cared for you, you wouldn't have tried harder or fixed these mistakes. But knowing, in the back of your mind psychologically or something, this person cares for me, I can't mess up. It's holding you accountable. Like, that's why I preach just getting to know people before we have them go do things. Because if I can have somebody and get to know somebody on a personable level, know who their family is, know their dog's name, it's going to take longer, but I guarantee you when that person's in a stressful situation and they're debating either to not do the right thing or to do the right thing, there's probably going to be something in the back of their minds like, man, I can't mess this up because, people are relying on me. They want me to get this done. They care for me to excel. That is huge.
Agreed. And then, so I deploy my wife gets her driver's license. Nice. We get things set up as much as we can. I deployed in November of 20. It got pushed back a couple times with like COVID related things, but November 2021. Yeah. And that changed. This whole thing is a giant. Everything, as if it can't get better, changes, and dramatically impacts my career.
So did you come back from that and go straight into the Air Force Marathon? I feel like that was led right up into when I met you in 22.
So I did not. I came. So when you and I met, it was I've been home about 3 months.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Because I was getting ready to PCS when you and I met at the marathon.
Oh yeah, because you were still at Wright Pat at the time. Yeah, because you were living there. Yep, when I met you.
Yeah.
So you come back from the deployment, you get ready to go do the Air Force Marathon. You're not in WCAP yet, right?
The time we met?
Yeah.
I've been in about a month.
Oh, so you just got officially into WCAP, but you're still at Wright. Oh, because you're getting ready to PCS to San Diego.
Correct. So what happens is, if you want, I'll tell you how the WCAP thing happened. Basically, from our last, you might remember, the door seemed pretty tight, and it almost seemed to be a bit of a difficult maze. Almost you would consider it gatekeeping to try to figure out how to get into WCAP from where I was standing. Mm-hmm. But things were about to change dramatically. So my leadership, Senior Master Sergeant Webb, and them at the chapel back at Wright Pat helped me route and get approval for WCAP. So my career function at the time, Chief Master Sergeant Gray, my base commander, now Brigadier General Miller, and my wing chaplain, just retired as of last week, Colonel Kim Bowen, they all signed me off to approve me if I were to get in WCAP. They have to do that during your application package, at least at the time that was the protocol. So I deploy. We could not figure out how to submit this thing. I go back to Wright Pat on a Saturday to print out some things for deployment. Like, I'm leaving in 2 days. And I figure out how to submit it, and I just click submit. I got it on the Air Force Sports. I don't even know how I found it. I just found it. And so I submitted my package 2 days before I deployed. And they routed it too, but we didn't know if it went the right place, and I wasn't going to be there physically. I was going to be in the Middle East once we figured that out. So I punched the button and got it in there. And so I deploy. I'm on a new world. I still literally, even though I just got there on 6 hours of sleep or whatever it was when we landed, I got up and I still trained and learned my way around the base a little bit. Just went out and race walked easy 6K or something, then got ready for the day. So my race walking also is a way of coping and medicating to allow myself to focus in multiple ways. And we can touch on that here later if you want, because I think that'd be clutch and applicable to others. But what happens though in the deployment, a lot of things, of course, but what I want to get down to connect the dots with WCAP is the chaplain I was with was a Catholic priest, Father Courier, and Father O and I we visited all the units we were supposed to on a daily basis. We had a list. And one day on the Friday there, it was our first unit of doing it visitations without the previous team. So now we control we're the rotation that's currently has the reins. And we had one left to visit, and it was the FSS team unit. And he says, it got to be about probably 84 to 90 degrees at this point. And he said, hey, I'm pretty tired. We can just visit them next week if you want. And I said, no, we should go visit them. Let's do it. And he goes, oh, maybe God has a reason for putting this on your heart for us to go visit them. You really want to go? And I had no reason to visit them. I just said, let's just finish it. Let's just do it. So we go there. He starts talking to the commander. And I'm talking to my fellow enlisted. And I made friends with a couple people that really had my back during that deployment. One was Airman, now Staff Sargent Biney. I had no idea I was about to make a friend for life with him. And then I hear their conversation, though, the chaplain and the commander. And they're talking about where they're going to go for their PCS. And the guy's name was Lieutenant Colonel Austin Pineda, about to become my guardian angel.
I just got an email from Pineda because you put me in contact with him.
Dude, Pineda he was my guardian angel, man, and I had no idea. And so Colonel Pineda is talking about teaching phys ed at the academy, and I start I pause my conversation with Airman Biney, and I go and say, "I'm sorry, how do you get a job like that? That sounds sweet." And he said, "Well, you have to have an education degree." And he turns back to the chaplain, continues talking. I said, "Sir, I have a undergrad. I have my bachelor's in education." He goes, "Oh, well, you've also had to been a Division I athlete." And then he turns back and continues talking to the chaplain. And I said, "Sir, I was a national champion." And he says, "In what?" And I said, "Track and field." He goes, "What event?" I said, "Race walking." And he's looking at my name tag, and he goes, and you could see him trying to like pronounce it. Like he didn't say it. He's just kind of like looking at it, and you could see his mind, the gears are going. And he goes, "That name looked," he goes, "How do you say that?" I said, "Mannozzi." He goes, "Why does your name seem so familiar?" And finally the chaplain he takes his hat, like kind of in emphasizing his moment to talk, and says, "Sir, you're looking at the Air Force Athlete of the Year for 2020, or the male athlete of the year." And he goes, "Oh, that's right. I've seen you come across my desk when they announced the board and when they announced the winners." So we get into a conversation a little bit, and he goes, "Oh, so you got any races coming up?" And I said, "Well, sir, I'm deployed, so no." And, then we kind of go into like, "What's next for you?" I said, "Well, I applied for WCAP." Because, "Did you get in?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I don't even know if I'll hear back. I was having trouble getting information." And it's all about finding the right contact, because it's not, and it wasn't that WCAP was bad. Like, I'm not putting them down as they were bad. It was that they rotate through people. So if you have Tech Sergeant so-and-so's contact, they PCS, they're out of the WCAP program, and they're no longer the point of contact. And sometimes they don't even know who to refer you to because those people leave. And other times, I hate to say it, my experience was a lot of times I would message people as an A1C, and I wouldn't get replies. I would call the offices. The numbers is just like it's a call tree. You're not going to reach the people. And so I just was frustrated. And that's why I made the comment that it could feel like you're being kept out of it, right? The gatekeeping comment. You could feel like, how do all these other people who are Division I athletes or, academy grads, how do they somehow transition almost, it would seem, fluidly into this program? And here you are, athlete of the year, well, thankfully now, but you were also held, your resume holds its own. Yeah. And you can't get an answer. And almost like I shared in your first podcast, I had a very different experience getting into this program, where when I go to my first base, I'm standing there having to realize, like, this ain't the time to bring up your athletic goals and WCAP dreams and all that. So here we are, this commander now, back to the deployment. Things are about to change for me dramatically. Unbelievable. And he stops me and goes, "This whole trailer at this point was listening to the conversation." He says, "We are distracting everyone's workday. You and I are going to set up an appointment and we'll have a discussion." And I said, "When would you like to have that appointment?" He goes, "Talk to your chapel leadership. You get back to me." I said, "Do you mind if I just knock on your door when I'm delivering mail?" I mean, he's the commander, right? And he says, "Yeah, do that. Just knock on my door. And if you don't see me, call or email." I've never had a lieutenant colonel say that, first of all. So, so I go back, and the chaplain, Courier, goes, he says, "Well, the good Lord's looking out for Mannozzi today." And he says, "You won't believe what happened to him." And Master Sergeant Carlo goes, "Oh no, what'd he do?" And he goes, "I'll let him tell you what he did." And so he goes, and so he gets a little concerned. He's not sure what this means. Yeah. But he doesn't, you could tell he's holding back from jumping to conclusions. And Master Sergeant Carlo played a pivotal role. And talk about having another mentor. He and I are, I would definitely say we have a lot of our own different uniquenesses, but he definitely ended up being a very valuable mentor to me during deployment. Very different style from Jevedon, but still would tell me what I needed to hear. And I can get on that later, but basically, when we were at our training for deployment, our Chapel Corps training, in fact, I have to remember the name of it, but anyhow, he told me that, basically we were talking and it got brought up about my athletics and athlete of the year. Chaplain Lieutenant Colonel Jans had congratulated me in front of the class for becoming the first Chapel Corps member to ever win that award, the first Chapel Corps member to ever compete in an Olympic team trials, enlisted or officer. And so that was kind of that was special to me that I got recognized. This is actually, I remember, it was called Fieldcraft. It was our Chapel Corps Fieldcraft. And so the supervisor I was about to have on deployment was there, Master Sergeant Carlone. He said, "Are you going to get to do any races while you're deployed, or any opportunities over there for race walking?" And I told him that our world champs for race walking for the first time will be in the Middle East in Oman. He goes, "Great." He goes, "That'd be awesome if we can get you to go to that." And I said, "Well, I have to qualify." He goes, "What do you mean?" And I told him that I have to be in California at San Diego for the trials. He goes, "Scratch that. That's a 1 in a million chance that will ever happen." He goes, "I'm sorry I even got your hopes up." So we come back now. Fast forward 3 months later, and I tell him about what happened in that tent with the lieutenant colonel, and he was in disbelief. And he said, "I don't know if you believe in a higher power, but you probably should." And I told him I do, and of course. And so he said, "Remember, when you speak to him, keep your bearings, be respectful. Consider yourself lucky. You don't normally have an A1C speaking to a lieutenant colonel commander. But I don't know what's going on here, but you just, please keep your bearing and respect this person." And so the day before Thanksgiving, I'm having this 2-hour meeting with Lieutenant Colonel Pineda. He kind of tells me who he is. I tell him who I am, of course. I let him kind of lead with his questions. I came in with a plan, and he said, so he emailed Air Force Sports. This is amazing. He used to be like the uniform director, if you will. They have a civilian, a GS, and then he was the uniform guy. And he laughs during this meeting, telling me, "You're the one that called in 2017 because when the individual you spoke with got off the phone with you, he came and vented to me about some race walk calling, thinking he wants to be an Olympian for the Air Force." And I kind of didn't know what to think of that. I'm like, did I make myself look like a fool? And he said, "Unfortunately, at the time you called, this was not the setup nor the approach that we used in WCAP. We mostly had academy grads, individual and athletes, which we still rely on." He says, "but it wasn't for people in your situation. Now, since I've been in, I've innovated a bit, and we have successfully recruited Olympic level athletes into the Air Force and supported them through WCAP to try to make the Olympics." And they actually had their first success at that deployment with Kelly Curtis, A1C Kelly Curtis. She's a trailblazer in her own right. In fact, I'm talking about mentors. She helped encourage me and guide me too, and was willing to share information when she was in WCAP, because I reached out to her when I found out about her. I found out through Facebook, I think, or someone told me they saw an article about a bobsledder. She's a skeleton athlete, actually. But when I was at Keesler in tech school, another person said, "Hey, I know you want to get in this WCAP program. I saw an article about this girl that got in, and she's not even in the Air Force." I said, "How is that possible? They're not allowed to do that." That's what I was told in 2017. Now it's 2020, right? And COVID, So I reached out to her. She was great too. Well, this girl ends up making the Olympics. So this shows success. Why is this important? Not only for my own story, but Kelly Curtis made history as the first athlete brought into the Air Force. She streamlines right into WCAP. I think she got a waiver to skip tech school, if I remember. She took tech school later. She got it all done. But it was because the timing of her was prime to make the Olympics, and she did. So she went from 6th in the country in skeleton, and from what I recall, him telling me, and then she ends up making the team in 2022. So this now shows a successful recipe for this program, and that was Lieutenant Colonel Pineda's brainchild. I could not believe he shared this. I couldn't have heard better news in my life sitting in his commanding trailer, right? Because they're those manufactured trailers, on deployment. Yep. And so I'm in shock to hear this. I don't even know how to say it. I'm almost shaking. And he gets to telling me, he goes, "By the way, I got feedback from your package." He goes over to his computer and says, you're going to be declined. You're not going to get in WCAP because your times are stale. He goes, "After getting to know you, I understand that you've had a lot of moving around and immigration with your family, going back and forth to Canada. You've had an injury. You've had life, right? You've had to be a dad and father and provide. And I understand that that's pulled you back." He says, but if you can make the U.S. team, you can probably put in another application. And he said, "Do you have any opportunities to do that?" So I told him I do. But I told him, I said, and I kind of was sheepish and said, "Well, the race is in California, and I have to be at those trials." And instead of that being the end of the conversation, it led to him speaking to my chapel leadership, they approved it. Him speaking to, unbelievable. In fact, Lieutenant Colonel Nevius, our wing chaplain, tells me, how come you didn't tell us you had this opportunity to race for the U.S. team? And I said, sir, because we're deployed. And he's like, yeah, but he says, this is apparently some big deal. And I said, well, sir, can you imagine if I came out here and asked you to leave deployment for a race? He goes, you know what? You're right. It's better that you didn't open your mouth, because your supervisor and I would have been having a very different conversation with you. It would have been a serious mentorship moment to bring you awareness of why you're deployed. He's like, so you were smart not to see that experience when I first got in the Air Force paid off later, right? To keep your mouth, keep your head down. And so this was the right person to speak. He's, of rank. He used to run the program, so he's a SME, right? Subject matter expert. He also cared. This is the big thing. So Lieutenant Colonel Pineda cared, and what he did was he wanted to see me have an equal opportunity with my non-deployed peers to make this to have a shot. Right? At least he gives me a shot. And so this went all the way up to the base commander, General Davis, and General Davis had to approve it. So I had to write down everything, like what details I need, why I need to. I had to testify each day of what I would be traveling to, racing to, acclimating to COVID testing. I'd include all that and why I requested each day I did. So we couldn't reach. So now it gets approved, to my complete surprise. I come to California. I'm just fast tracking a bit. Come to California. I stay incognito, kind of hiding. I wouldn't say hiding. it was COVID, Omicron. Yeah. You didn't want to be out mingling and then tell them, I was shopping at the mall and I got COVID, So like, it wasn't, I definitely took it serious. This was my, my one shot, like Eminem, you don't lose yourself. That song seems like a good theme, because you don't want to miss your chance. And so my cousins thankfully housed me, and I just prepared for the race. I show up at the race. I had like 5 lucky breaks that needed to happen for me to make this team. All of them happened. I'd hit my first qualifying time in 5 years for a U.S. team. So I end up getting named to the team for the first time in 5 years. I go to Oman, which is neighboring Saudi Arabia. So for me to go, the commander was super enthused to send me. And he loved it, because he said, you're representing PSAB, you're representing your deployed units, all the people here, you represent all of us. And we are so, he said, it's an awesome stuff that we have a U.S. team and world-class athlete representing our base. Completely different worlds of mindset that I'm walking into now. These are really, obviously senior ranking officials that are supporting you. And I was not going to screw it up. But I also remember Colonel Pineda telling me very briefly, but made sure that when I left his trailer from that meeting, Thanksgiving, the day before Thanksgiving, he said to me, you're going to continue doing your job well, and everything that's required, and the deployment needs come first. He's like, because if I hear anything different, I will not support you. But I know we're not going to have that conversation, are we? And I said, no, sir. And that was it. And so I already knew, though, I was not going to, I had to stay humble and realize that you are very blessed for this, but don't let it make you think you're above your work or anybody else here serving. And that was a very, I would say, testing moment, but sobering moment. So when I went back to the U.S. and I came back to deployment from the qualifying race, I did not stop and see my wife and kids, because my family, all the people that are now my family deployed, over in PSAP, they don't get to go home and see their family.
Yeah.
And so if how can I have credibility in the Chapel Corps going to see these people, empathizing with them, when really you're having privileges they don't have, on top of what already happened, this miraculous race opportunity. So I put my comrades, my respect and my wanting to be one with them first, because I figured when they go home, I'll get to go home. And so what happened was I then go to Oman. I end up finishing. So get this. Then I find out from Lieutenant Colonel Pineda that the Air Force Sports wants me to, okay, you hit a qualifying time. You made a U.S. team. And I'm thinking, great, I'm going to be in. And he goes, well, they also want you to finish top 3. And I said, how do I go from 5th in the country to 3 in 6 weeks? And he says, well, that's what they require. So you asked, there you have it. And so I go to Oman. Our top U.S. male drops out of the race. I finished third American and secure us scoring as a team as eighth in the world, which was the highest scoring team at that event for the U.S. in 2022. So I come back. We leave deployment. Some other things happen, some correspondences involving Air Force sports. I leave deployment, and Colonel Pineda coins me, and he tells me, by the way, you might want to reapply for WCAP. We probably, so I reapplied before I even flew out of PSAP. And because I knew, I don't need to tell you, redeployment is heavy in itself.
Yeah.
And unpredictable sometimes. So meaning like your time, your energy, other things that a lot of change. So I get my application resubmitted to WCAP. I did the Ruck March, as this how you and I kind of link up later, but I ended up doing that Norwegian Foot March, which was also another incredible experience. I leave PSAP, go to the deed for a while, go to Ramstein, then come back home. And then that's May of 22. And then June 16th of 22, I get a call into our wing chaplain's office. And a couple people in my, religious affairs went, ooh, you're in trouble. And, just kind of joking. It's all good humor. So Chaplain Bowen asked me, how's your day going? I said, it's going great. How about you, sir? He goes, how would you like your day to go even better? And I said, and then I started to get a feel. I was like, what's going on here? So he basically at that point breaks the news that, I was named to WCAP. We had a good mentorship conversation where he supported and encouraged my aspirations to, someday commission, if that's meant to be. And then that was another person that was a mentor to me, was our wing chaplain, fortunately, Chaplain Bowen. And that was, so there we are, June 22. And actually in June, I met the Cincinnati Bengals, and a couple of them came to, or actually a good couple dozen came to Wright Pat, and we got to have lunch with them. And when I spoke to one of them, he had shared how on needles and pins he was about the draft and how it's so uncertain. And I said, I feel like I can relate. And he goes, man. And the reason I said that was because I was still in limbo and waiting to find out if I would make WCAP. So yeah, there we have it. Then so now August 1st is when I officially became part of WCAP, no longer chapel. Even though I was at Wright Pat, because I needed the PCS, I needed to find a home in San Diego. I also went to the immersion, which is kind of the in-processing for WCAP in Lackland, because we're out of service headquarters, Texas. And so we went down there, August 2nd or whatever. I flew down there, and we did our whole week of immersion and in processing into the world-class athlete program, which was busy, but it was phenomenal. And then that's August. So I come back and I meet you in September at the marathon.
Yeah. So I just realized it was 21 when we met the year before that, but
it was 22. I'll tell you why I know it was 22, because I was moving. I know it was 22 that you and I met, because you were getting ready to deploy in a few months or 6 months or something of that nature. And I had just gotten back from a deployment. And I remember we briefly spoke, and I know it was 22 because the 22 was the first marathon that was in person for 3 years.
Okay.
Because the prior two that I was in Dayton for, they were virtual because of the pandemic. So 21 was virtual, last minute, unfortunately. And 20 was definitely virtual, like from the gun.
Gotcha. Okay. Because I was trying to think how I got to know you about the NFM when you were deployed.
Because I deployed. Yeah, that's a good question. So you were also a mentor, whether you realize it or not, in much of this. And this is a good example of how. So I come back in 22. You and I meet in 22. Mm-hmm. I did the NFM.
Oh, that's right. I didn't know you when you did the NFM. You just knew I did it, and then you followed up with me to help. Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah.
You posted on your Facebook that you were hosting one.
Yeah.
And so I was getting no reply. Yeah, I was getting dropped to get our NFM badge and our certificate because the Army Guard unit, that the Florida Hurricanes that hosted it, their point of contact basically just ignored all the Air Force people and left us to figure it out ourselves. And that's where you and I came into play.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. For some reason, I thought I knew you when you did your NFM, but you just brought it up to me after I did mine. Hey, I did one when I was deployed. I needed, so I was like, dude, I got you. I'll just figure out a way where we can say you did one with us. We use your time and we do all that. Yeah. So
it was legit. You saved us. You saved me and 13 other airmen from falling through the cracks of not even counting, even though we did it.
So I'm just gonna bring up how we met on my side. So I'm in this crazy like transformation of my life, right? That year I'm just doing a bunch of crazy stuff. I'm doing 4x4x48. I do the Nijmegen Ruck March over in the Netherlands for 80 miles. I do a half Ironman. I'm getting ready to finish my events with Air Force Marathon. I go up there by myself, not really knowing anybody. And I'm just walking around the convention, if I remember right, the day prior, listening to all the vendors. And I think, if I remember right, I think me and you are just listening to a vendor. And I feel like I just look over at you and I'm just like, hey, I think you were just there. And we just started talking.
No, you're right. We were both looking at the cycling attire for the Air Force military team.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Because I was just getting done doing all my racing stuff. So I was like, oh, that'd be pretty cool. Yeah. Yep.
It was a military endurance team or something like that. Had a booth. And so you and I were looking at their stuff. Their membership papers, and then we started talking, and he asked about like what sports we do.
Yeah, and then I think that was it, man. That's how we hit it off, and then I think we just connected there, and then obviously I was just like, hey, I'll reach out to you when come the race. But I reached out to you. I don't know if it was that night. I think it was that night.
Was that night? I got an
Uber. Yeah. I got an Uber to your house that morning of the race where I met you and your friends. We walked over because you lived right across sort of the street, I say, from Wright Pat. We walked over to the race. We walked in there. We did the race. And then I hung out with you after in that little you guys were. We chilled, we relaxed. Then we went to your house. You let me change, eat. And then you took me to the airport. You dropped me off. Yeah, dude, that was crazy, man. That was so cool.
That's wow. Yeah, it's almost surprising how we became friends, almost something unseemingly like that. But then, my wife and I talked about you when you had sealed the fate to help us get what we already earned, at the Norwegian Foot March, the NFM certificate. My wife said, who would have ever thought, I said to my wife, who would have ever thought that just letting this guy put his stuff, saying yes to let him put his stuff in our house, was going to lead to someone that ended up saving, our backside with getting this whole issue resolved. And so she was just complimenting that, it's what happens when you do something good for someone. I said, well, it wasn't a big deal for me to let him put his stuff in our house. We live right here by the base. I mean, we lived at the footsteps of the marathon, Yeah.
And I think you have the same mindset as me, just meeting people in general without an intent behind why we're meeting them opens the doors for so much, I don't go out and meet people with the reasoning being like, I will use this person for later or this. I just go, just like you, we just go out and meet people. We talk to them. We get to know them. We build a relationship. And coincidentally, sometimes down the road, usually we need them for something. And there's always that nug in the back of our mind, like, oh, for instance, the WCAP or athlete stuff, when you put me in contact with that colonel, now I'm on that email chain where he sends out to where at least now I have this email chain where in case I want to pursue this later, that connection was established through the email that you connected us with.
Lieutenant Colonel Perneda?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff. Yeah. He's over at the academy now, but yeah, he is someone that I actually, even today when I was riding my bike, dedicated a minute to because there's a part of his bike path that reminds me of being a Prince Sultan. I know it sounds crazy, but certain things, it's sandy and I'm here by the beach kind of because I'm in San Diego. So seeing a lot of sand for a while in the military fence by the naval base sometimes remind me of the deployment. It'll give me a little flashback there. So I kind of, that's another thing is instead of letting my mind wander, I just give thanks for the things that have gone well that very easily could have not happened and things would look very different for me right now.
I like how you pull your mind in back like that. Like you catch yourself when it's about to wander, you go, and it's not like you pull it back in to get really deep in thought. It's just a really quick, like gratitude, move, focus. Okay, my mind's wandering. Come back here, like gratitude, mind, focus. That's something I got to consider when I'm running, because sometimes I go down a deep thought path, where I'm focused, but I'm not really focused. I'm just too focused almost. So I need to like, hey, step away from my thought, go out, come back to a new one, and then recage.
Absolutely. I think it's just been through trial and error and time that I've been, it's like I said, it's been an evolving process for me to get to this point, but I find it's the most productive in that you're present, you're right, mentally present, but you're also being grateful, I find, is a force multiplier versus getting angry about a very nasty comment someone said to me 3 years ago, about my race walking, or, I mean, even when I won Athlete of the Year, most people were pretty happy for me, or at least neutral. But you get some people that will say, "Oh, well, you're lucky that the Air Force supported you," but they don't realize like all the journey. Like you've had to put yourself out there and become a sacrificial lamb for certain things to risk it to have things the potential for success, right? So, success doesn't just come to those who want it. It often comes to people who will take a risk, who take the chance. And that's something that I think people don't take enough credit. They look at someone from the outside and they're like, well, somebody helped you. And you're like, well, you're right. But for that somebody that helped me, I also had to live in poverty for 7 years and have all these experiences that built me up to where I'm at now. You're just seeing the tip of the iceberg now. You're not seeing all that went into it and all that's brought me to this point.
Yeah, no, I feel you on that one. When I look at where I'm at physically in my life right now, like a lot of people will go like, oh, that's nice that you lost all this weight or you got in this shape, with not flying or not doing anything, and just doing that. I was like, well, that's what you see or what you think you see, when in reality I had a lot of decisions I had to make, on my career, on my life, on my family life, to know like 3 or 5 years later where it's going to end up. A lot of people, I think, they take the scope of success too short instead of looking at it 5 or 3 years down the road where it's going to impact you. And that's where I'm at right now. Like, I am reaping the benefits of my past 3 years of really, really hard work in my family life, my personal life, where I had to, choose, my military career where it hasn't progressed as I see, or not me, but the military thinks it should be, as a major select, not flying, trying to change jobs, like I had to pick and choose a lot of that as I was trying to find me a little bit. But yeah,
that's a difficult process because it requires us, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is where we can kind of relate. You have to put more in than other people will put in and what other people consider sane. I remember putting in applications for WCAP and people would be like, hey, go home, at the office. And I'd be like, well, this is Air Force related. But when I go home, I have kids and my wife would rather when I come home that I'm present at home. So she supported me to say, do this things that's going to help you while you're at the chapel so that when you come home, it's not like you're sitting there, but I can't expect anything of you. And the kids can't really interact with you because you're trying to do this. So I think that requires you and I, like, and people in our shoes, and no matter what it is, to really have to make those difficult decisions because you have to sacrifice to get stuff done. No one's really going to do it for you. And we always know, people say no one cares about your career like you do. And I think it shines even more when it's things outside of that scope.
Yeah, it's huge. And I think you hit another thing on the head too. Dang, what did you say? I think you said success doesn't come without sacrifice, really. And sometimes that sacrifice, and what's crazy, people think that sacrifice is like everlasting, but it's not. It's just a balance. You sacrifice in one area, but then you can balance those in another. Like, I listened to a good podcast with Ed Milet and Matthew McConaughey. And Matthew McConaughey and Ed Milet talk about, like, it's like a deck of cards, right? Everything they prioritize, like family, faith, finance, friends, and another thing. And every now and then when they're focusing on their friends, maybe finances fall down and they have to figure out how to like keep these things all afloat. One may go down, one may be thriving, and it's all a balance throughout your life to just continue that success journey.
And it is difficult because it ebbs and flows, right, with all of it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's sometimes just being okay with buoying with the tide, right? If the tide takes you up, it takes you down, because you don't control the tide. You just have to sometimes, like you were saying, I think earlier about, and I loved what you were sharing, sometimes you don't get things done today. They get done tomorrow, but the point is that you're taking action and you're taking care of priorities, and it's going to come point where the tide's going to pull in that other priority, right? And it's going to be the time to take care of it.
Yeah. I guess so. What do you got going on now? What's the WCAP throwing at you? I know you guys are in San Diego. You're getting your foot settled in there. You got your training going. What's next?
Last year was crazy. When I got in the WCAP, it was a big transition. We moved to San Diego to figure things out, especially with getting services for my kids' needs and figuring out other things that we have now thankfully seen come to fruition. I have gotten back from an injury. I had a lingering, I had an adductor tear, adductor tear. And so that took navigating that process through the naval medical. And that took kind of the majority of 2023 out for me. Okay. So I went to ALS.
Yeah.
Well, I was just getting back in the training, but I was early enough in the fall that I went to ALS, completed it. Oh, by the way, I should have mentioned I studied for staff, made staff, thankfully. And I did receive my first quarterly award, by the way, while I've been in WCAP. I'm down at the Services Center in Texas. And so that's pretty cool. I know it's not the biggest award, but I was thankful after, not ever winning it while I was my first 3 years in the Air Force. Mm-hmm. So I'm now actually 4 years, hard to believe, but I'm now getting healthy again. I completed ALS in the fall, which was incredible. Yeah. I gave the first ever WCAP brief at a professional development. So that was really a great opportunity. I got to meet a whole new group of people I've never met before and made new friends and got to experience my first time at a Space Force base. It felt great to reconnect and be part of that community again. In fact, it was double dose. I thrived on being part of an Air Force, Space Force community again while I was there. And then, and I'm plugged in a little bit to naval bases, but it's not the same. I mean, I was there plugged in because you're part of a unit or you're part of like the ALS class there. So you are like, you're embedded, right? Not just there to teach a race walking lesson or something or work out at the gym or use the medical. So different in-depth experience than what I get right now in the naval bases for the most part. And so that was exciting, but also because the demand of ALS, I could not do the same amount of training focus. Yeah. I mean, we were at accountability by 7 a.m. sometime, or I think it was 7 a.m. or 7:10 when I was at ALS many times. That's a lot of times when I'm like just starting my workout back in San Diego. So ALS gave me the perspective to appreciate the opportunity of WCAP. It gave me like a reboot reminder. Yeah. Your typical duty day is not WCAP when you were in the chapel and at ALS. And it reminded me of like to really streamline my focus to appreciate it and enjoy it while I'm in it. So that brought me back to WCAP, doubly focused, doubly charged from that experience at ALS. And that's now we're Thanksgiving time. We move into naval housing, which was better for the kids, better for their school situation. And that picked up things even more exponentially. And I now have had 4 months of healthy training, which led to 8th in the marathon race walk relay trials individually. My partner and I were 7th as a team, but I was 8th individually. And then, which I'm happy with because I missed almost a year of training. Then I trained 2 more months to equal this 4 months of consistent race walk training to where I'm at to race walk in a 20K this past St. Patrick's Day. And I walked my best 20K time in 7.5 years. Nice. So that exceeded the time in my WCAP application. So as an Air Force Olympian, Kevin Easler told me, he said, you at least earned your keep in the program, especially after missing a year, 50% of it with an injury. And thankfully, the Air Force, I thank my leadership for keeping me in. I thank them for helping me and my coach and my trainer out at the naval base. I had a couple of trainers, Janessa and Nick, that helped me. And so now it's just getting the trials are in June. And so, hey, Jason. A little excited there. And so the trials are in late June, and everything now is about delicately balancing preparing for the trials, but also trying to remain injury free, right? I don't want, after having that year of that nasty adductor issue, I don't want anything reemerge coming to the surface at such a critical time.
Nice. Man, that's cool. Well, shoot, man, I think that's a great recap, ending point again, man. We get through the battles, you get through the deployment, you get through injury, moving again, and now you're finally getting sort of a battle rhythm, right? 4 years into the military, you got your feet under you, you're ready to move. I look forward to June hearing from you. Where's the race at in June?
So it will be in Eugene, Oregon. Actually, ours might be in Springfield. Our course might be in Springfield, but Eugene, Oregon officially hosts the Olympic trials.
Gotcha.
And it's called Eugene, Oregon, for those that don't know, is considered like the track mecca of the U.S.
Yep.
It's called Tracktown, USA.
Nice. Well, that's cool, man. I will still connect all the stuff I put on the last episode on this one as well for people to reach out to you. Do you have any last-minute parting shots, or what do you got for everybody out there?
No, Manny, I appreciate you having me on, and honestly, you've been also another great encouragement and resource and mentor. Since we've met, I gave already the Norwegian foot march as one, but the other thing is just many times I've reached out to you despite being busy. I appreciate that you'll try to help or give me advice, and that's invaluable. I mean, people are invaluable, and a lot of people that I thought I wouldn't get along with because we're extremely different in many ways have a lot of times become people I really appreciate, and I see the value. You just have to work past differences, and I think that's the thing with people. A lot of times people we hold against each other what's different about us or what's something that we don't care for in someone else. But I learned from a Master Sergeant Hamley at BMT. He said, the sooner you realize that there's people who think different than you, the easier life's going to get. And I thought that was pretty a profound and valuable lesson to learn for me at basic.
Nice. Well, I like it, man. We'll end there. Like I said, everybody, if you've enjoyed, you learned something, which you had to have learned something because I have a full page of notes here. Please do what you got to do. Share, save, follow, like, reach out to us. I look forward to dropping this episode. It'll probably